Japanese officials are still investigating after a man set fire to an anime studio in Kyoto, killing 33 people. More than 30 people were also hurt in the attack. Officials say the suspect is a 41-year-old man who did not work for the studio. He is still in the hospital.
Local media is reporting that he set the fire because he believed the company stole his novel. Officials say that he shouted, "You die," as he poured flammable liquid at the studio and lit it on fire. The incident has left anime fans across the nation in mourning. So CBSN contributor and senior fellow at the Asia Society, Isaac Stonefish, is joining us now to talk a little bit about this and a few other things too. But man, Isaac, when I heard this story, I just thought it's just not the type of crime that you hear coming out of Japan.
It's an absolutely horrific story. And witnesses talked about seeing bodies, top floor, people trying to jump, people just skin flayed. Like very, very gruesome story.
So I guess the question for a lot of people is, this has had a huge impact on the Japanese public. You see people going there and placing memorials. This just doesn't happen in Japan, this type of arson.
It's very rare. Japan has some of the world's strongest gun control laws. You do have less mass murders there, but I think one lesson from this is that if someone has the determination to go and kill dozens of people, they can find a way.
Is it significant that it happened at an anime studio? I don't know, because I'm here in this country, but I know that anime fans are, passionate, and that's what I thought. I thought, gosh, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to want to know what sort of things do they do at that studio, and that sort of thing.
I think it certainly makes it a bigger story than if it were just at some more anonymous factory somewhere, for good and for bad. So far, it seems like it's possible that the suspect felt that the studio stole something from him, and he felt very strongly and passionately about it, and then so committed this heinous act.
So let's move on to some other stories that are happening in the region. We covered the Hong Kong protests extensively here for hours on end, and then we sort of pivoted away, as we do sometimes in news, right? You can't keep us focused on something for too long, but the protests are still going on.
That's right, and there might be more this weekend. There was big protests last weekend, and there's still a lot of discontent among people in Hong Kong who feel that their non-elected representatives, surprise, surprise, don't represent them.
But the extradition legislation, that's off the table, no?
So the chief executive, Carrie Lam, said that it was dead, but they haven't formally withdrawn it. So I think there's a fear that a couple months from now, things calm down, they try to push it back. And Carrie Lam is walking a very difficult line between trying to please her bosses in Beijing and then trying to please the 6-7 million people of Hong Kong.
All right, let's talk about North Korea now. A new report found that the country is facing a harvest that is half of what was expected this year. People there, as we know, are already facing high rates of malnutrition and disease. What's causing this collapse in the crop yields, and is it fixable?
It's really tough because North Korea is one of the world's worst governed countries, and it's certainly the fault of the Kim Jong-un regime. That said, sanctions and a lack of humanitarian relief is certainly making the situation worse for North Korea. So at the time that this came out, I think one of the Swiss agencies is saying we need about $450,000 to fund really important humanitarian aid there. And we just found that North Korean government spent $500,000 on, I think, Mercedes-Benzes.
I don't understand, though. I understand the use of sanctions diplomatically and why they are useful. But when you hear something like this and you know that the effects of this lower crop yield is going to kill children and people who have nothing in life to begin with, but that the leader of that country can still afford a $500,000 Mercedes-Benz, then that's when you begin to question whether or not these sanctions are going to work. If he doesn't care that people are dying and he's still ramping up his nuclear program, what's the point?
I think part of the sanctions are, hey, if we do this, we can destabilize the North Korean regime, and this will make the country's leaders crumble, and there'll be a revolution.
That's the way it's supposed to work.
That's the way it's supposed to be. I mean, they've been doing this since the late 40s, and hundreds of thousands of people have died, maybe millions of people have died because of it, and children, families, teachers, students, completely blameless people. So it's a lot of moral responsibility to not give them the food that they need to survive.
Because this is not the first time that North Korea has dealt with this sort of thing. And in fact, when I started to sort of look up the story, what I found was stories from 2007, stories from, I mean, you know, it happens quite frequently that they are not making enough food to support themselves. Is China doing anything? Is China intervening in any way?
China's not really doing too much. I mean, China's argument on all of this is we bring economic development. Economic development allows for people to have enough to eat because they climb out of poverty. There's some truth to that. It's, I mean, certainly a lot more that they could do. I mean, I think really the problem here is that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is punishing its own people. Why are we doing the same?
Right.
So finally, let's talk about the detention of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Two groups of countries sent competing letters to the UN Human Rights Council. One of the letters was from countries including the UK and Canada, which I thought was really interesting, and it called for an end to these detentions. The other letter, though, was signed by countries from Saudi Arabia, Russia, and those letters praised China's human rights achievements. What's your take on that?
We just talked about a whole list of atrocities here. This is far and away the worst. We have 1 to 2 million Muslims in concentration camps in northwest China. And the strategy that Beijing has been taking quite effectively, I would say, is to try to make countries that are friendly with it stand up for its abuse of Muslims in northwest China and giving it political and diplomatic cover. I mean, I think it's very significant that Saudi Arabia is
a Muslim country.
Muslim country, defender of the two mosques, another thing they call MBS, it's where Mecca and Medina are. And MBS has, the ruler of Saudi Arabia has very publicly praised what Beijing is doing and defended what Beijing is doing. I find that
remarkable. Supposedly the family of MBS, the Al-Saud family, are the defenders of Islam, according to, you know, if you are a subscriber to that particular religious way of thinking. And so these are Muslims, and they are defending their abusers.
Yeah, we have a situation where Muslims in Xinjiang cannot own Qurans, are forced to eat pork, are forced to drink alcohol, can't have beards, can't have veils. They're really trying to sinicize them. They're trying to eradicate a lot of what makes that religion Islam, and it's really, really tragic.
And I take it that the U.S. did not sign on to the letter that the U.K. and Canada signed on to?
So the U.S. has been fairly involved in pushing for more attention to the situation. Mike Pompeo has been very outspoken about it, and certain senators, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, have also been very outspoken about it. I think there's a lot of push for the U.S. to do more. Trump doesn't seem to prioritize this issue. It's not something that's really set afire under him, but it's nice that Pence and Pompeo have spoken about this.
Isaac Stonefish, thank you so much.
Thank you.